listening to The Manscape, a podcast about being a man in today's ever-changing world. I'm Joseph
And
Benish.
I'm Tim Cox. On this episode, we talk about transphobia and fashion and trivia. But first, if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend, share the episode, leave us a kind review, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Manscape Pod. If you feel like reaching out, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at themanscapepod@gmail.com. All right. And on today's episode, we talk about transphobia. Joining for us for this discussion is Michael Soto. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
All right. So give us the story. How do you know Joseph?
Oh, gosh. Joseph and I met years ago when we were both working in the arts and just have known each other in the community, working on all sorts of different arts projects and activism projects. And I think the last thing that we actually did together was a meeting about being men and working to be more feminist and less patriarchal and creating a community of men that were doing that.
Nice. All right.
Yes.
Joseph, bring it in here, buddy.
That's how I remember it. Again, arts, foundation. Arts is the foundation of everything. Don't get me started. But as we get into our main topic, I just want to be, open and vulnerable and say that this is all new to me. Not that I haven't had lots of practice having conversations about how people are treated differently. Different people are treated differently in our society, as I think is true in every society, but I really only know this one. And so, as a kid, and as a younger person, I don't think I had any more awareness of what trans was or how to, talk to people any better or worse than anybody else. Hopefully I'm a little bit wiser now on in my years, but maybe not. But my one point to kick this off is me going to be really blunt and honest, is while this new doesn't scare me, but new seems to scare society. And, since people came over on boats, uninvited, we have feared the indigenous people of the land. We feared people that were brought over and enslaved. Then we feared, other minorities like Chinese people. Then we feared women and tried to prevent their right to vote. I learned recently that after suffrage, after women got the right to vote, men of all ages still stood outside of voting polls to try to prevent them from voting after they got the right to do it. Mm-hmm. So that fear continued. And then, fear of gay people, and now it seems like trans is kind of the new kid on the block. And now we're all about, there's laws all over the country trying to be passed to prevent a trans person from using a bathroom. And it's like, whose freaking business is it which bathroom you use, since that's not a place that's like really anything scary happens. So that's my lead into this. It seems like so much of this is fear based. And
yeah,
Tim, I don't know if you have anything to add to that before we let Michael.
Yeah, from my perspective, a lot of this is not new to me, surprisingly, especially as someone who's a conservative. And I have a government job, and I've been exposed to the trans community through a lot of outreach and activism through my work, mainly education and those kinds of things. Back to, I want to say mainly, it was about 2016. We had a conference in the Bay Area, and we spoke to a lot of attorneys who do like hardcore litigation, and a lot of trans attorneys. They came out and they facilitated a conversation about the trans communities and stuff. And this was pre-pronouns and all that other kind of stuff. And for the most part, I don't want to say, I have a very different view as a conservative, because I'm more of the stop the ideology stuff, those kinds of things, and get back to the basics with conservatism, but I mean, I do think this outrage, this false flag outrage has really kind of exacerbated a lot of things and kind of just put a spotlight on a lot of issues in the trans community that as opposed to the trans community having a good entrance into acceptance, it's been more of a push into that whole society, and all of this negative political attention and all that kind of stuff. It's just not, it just hasn't been ideal for the trans community,
Yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is, Joseph, I know you said as a kid, as a young person, you didn't necessarily have the language, the knowledge, right, to be able to know about or understand trans people. And I had that same experience. I'm in my 40s. When I was growing up, the internet did not exist, right? We definitely didn't have cell phones. Like, I didn't have access to all the information in the world, right, at the tip of my fingertips, like today's
right.
do. And I was an adult before I heard the word transgender. I was an adult before I met a trans person and said, oh my gosh, there are other people like me. Whoa, there's a word for who I am, and there's a community of people that exist, and there are people who have done this before me, and there's a way to medically transition and socially transition and become the person, the boy and the man that I've always known I am, right? Like, my first memories of gender were having to be told by everyone around me that to them I was not the little boy that I knew I was. They thought I was a girl, right? And so being sort of gender corrected my whole life. So I think we're in an interesting position because there were trans people before me, right? There was generations of trans people. The first sort of medical transitions were really starting to happen a bit before World War II, kind of in the 20s and the 30s, then a little more publicly in the 40s.
I had no idea.
And both female to male and male to female, surgical and hormonal transitions. Back in that time and during my time of transitioning, so from the early 20th century until the early 21st century, for trans people that medically and socially transitioned, there was a protocol, right? There were medical standards called the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care, and so I had to do certain things, like go to a year of therapy before I was allowed to start hormone therapy, right? I was speaking to psychiatrists and talking to them about my gender experience and helping, talking about my sort of whole person experience so that I was ready to medically transition, right? Same thing for surgery. There was a process that we went through. And that, for me was a different experience for me 25-ish years ago, or almost 25 years ago, than it is today, right? And so my generation is one of the first to have widely available medical transition. There were a few people here and there, and it was very experimental, right? Sort of for a long time. And my generation and people that transitioned in sort of the late 90s, right, or early 2000s, we had greater access to hormones, greater access to surgery, better surgeries, right? But I still remember when I started HRT, which is the hormone therapy. I remember my doctor saying, there is some risk here. Like, we don't actually really know a lot about what's going to happen to you when you're 60 or 80. Like, we haven't had a lot of trans people transitioning medically, and so you're kind of at the beginning of this, right? And so you're taking on some medical risk. That's true of anything in terms of medical experience, right? I've had that with my thyroid, with my gallbladder, with all sorts of things, as I've aged. But today we've got really the first generation of youth that want to transition, right? My parents did not have the language to know that I was trans. I didn't have the language to be able to say I'm a trans person and here are my options. Today's a really different reality, right? We've got all this information about trans people and trans youth, wanting to be a part of that.
Yeah. Can I?
Jump in.
Yeah, and can I ask before we kind of go down that road of what's available now? Because the arguments I see a lot on the interweb are about gender, and I feel like people overlap the idea of your biological, your physiological apparatus that you're born with, and gender, and because I perceive gender as how you self-identify, but would you mind answering like what were the markers like? How do you know that you're at a young age? You were very clear, your whole life. How do you know that you're a boy and what the differences are between being a boy and a girl? I mean, it's got to be more than just I like blue more than pink.
Absolutely.
Are you able to articulate any of that, or willing to
Sure.
share that with us
Absolutely.
in the world?
Is it okay if I kind of define gender identity, and sex first to kind of give people a place to start from?
Sure.
So our gender, right, is gender is manhood or womanhood, right? It's being a man or a woman in the world. So that's something that is about many things, and that includes our sex, but it also includes our gender identity. And so for people that their sex, their biological sex, and their chromosomal sex, hormonal sex, all of those things aligns with their gender identity, their gender is then, I'm assuming, Joseph, similar to you, you're, from what I know, your gender identity and your sex align, and so you don't experience the kind of gender dysphoria that someone like me would experience, right? Because those things align. For someone like me,
yeah, I'm called cisgendered, right? Like
exactly.
They're all
exactly
line up. Yeah.
So for someone like me, my sex and my chromosomal sex, my hormonal sex without intervention, all of those kinds of things do not align with my gender identity. So all human beings develop a gender identity actually in childhood, typically between the ages of about 3 and 5 for most children. That's when we're developing our gender identity. For me, my gender identity developed in a way that it didn't resonate with my chromosomal sex, my hormonal sex, right? Those sorts of characteristics. And so there was a dissonance there. So I just knew.
But how did you know at a young age?
I always identified with boys. That's just how I thought of myself. And, similar to the way I'm sure your gender identity developed, like you knew something inherently about yourself, right? You looked at yourself, you looked at other children, other adults in your life, and you said, oh, I identify with men and manhood and boyhood, right? And those things appealed to you. It felt right. I remember, sort of having dreams as a child that at some point in my life I would develop physically into a boy, right? And finally be at one with myself, right? And being like, oh, well, that's just going to happen at some point because that's what happens for boys, right? And so it just was never a question for me. I always knew within myself that everything girl that my parents, that my family, that my community wanted me to experience and be felt wrong to me. It felt like a violation. It felt like I was being forced to be something that I wasn't. And so it was very disturbing and frustrating and upsetting. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And if I can kind of put Tim on the spot now, because Tim, you have a boy and a girl. Yeah. Are you aware of the trends and the things that you spend and buy for them? Because I've had this conversation. I've had a version of this conversation before where I knew, once you start thinking about it, it's really obvious. I mean, we set up boys to be boys by giving them trucks and guns and hammers, and we set up girls to be girls by giving them dolls and flowers and kitchenette sets. And I'm not saying that's all bad. There's so much nuance to it. I wonder, Tim, if you are aware or ever conscious of that yourself as a parent.
Yeah. So I've gone through a lot of like EEOC, unconscious bias stuff. So I try to be a little bit more self-aware in my life. And it was interesting because we did buy a Dyson vacuum cleaner that they make for kids. And on the box, at least the first incarnation of this on the box, it was a little girl who was, doing the vacuum cleaning. You just put some batteries in it and you can operate it. So we got it, and we really just got it for my son because my daughter is younger. So my son just loved doing vacuuming and I do most of the cleaning in my house anyway. So most of the vacuuming at least. And but that has more to do with schedules as opposed to, roles. But no, we've always been very ambiguous as far as like what we try to give our kids. We've always been more into, either pop culture or educational kind of stuff, as opposed to just saying that you are a boy and you have to play with trucks and you're a girl and you have to play with dolls. I mean, my daughter has gravitated toward dolls. I don't think the dolls that she has, I mean, most of them, almost all of them have been given to her by somebody else, but we've been my kid's more like a science set, and my daughter's wanted to be an astronaut and stuff. And so, there was a period of time where if she actually wants to, when she's in a class in elementary school and she has a really great teacher, she always has that within the first couple of weeks of school. Dad, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be a teacher. And I know that line's coming. I'm like, okay, it's a very noble profession. But, I said, it's great that you have a teacher that influences you. But you know what's even better than being a teacher? I was like, showing your teacher that you were influenced by that teacher. Well, all of her teachers have been women. So you've been influenced by her to be an astronaut and to show her that you were part of that. She was part of that journey that molded you to do that. So, so we basically, we try not to lock our kids into gender roles. Mainly because, of course, I mean, we went to college together, we have theater degrees. So, we want to make sure that our kids aren't on a track, on a one-way thinking track, and yeah.
So then, Tim, can I ask your opinion? I mean, any podcast is about opinions. Why then is there why are there so many legislative, regulative bills coming down to try to control who trans people are by the Republican Party?
I'm going to say, because it didn't exist before. It did, but it didn't. So no one was talking about it pre-Caitlyn Jenner. No, and pre-Caitlyn Jenner, okay. It's not the first time I've seen. And we know Jeff McMahon, and I spent a summer in New York, and I went to one of his performances, or not his performance. It was a play that he wrote that Lance Garabi actually performed in, and right outside there was someone who was trans, and it's not like it's not like this didn't exist before. But now that it exists to Republicans, it's now a thing. And it's the unknown. And like critical race theory, I don't like it, but I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to do something about it. Make sure it stays out of my, and I really think, and this is where I firmly stand on this, is that I think Republicans need to get out of these ideological issues completely because they're losing. If they get back to real, true conservatism, there'll be some Ronald Reagans again, but ultimately, they need to stop running on these issues. It's all fear based. It's all anger based, hatred based, and it's a losing ticket for them. So, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's something that didn't exist until now in their eyes. So now they have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm sorry, I've been to a drag show before. I've been to a couple actually. I don't know of any drag shows that actually appeal to little kids or are directed toward little kids. I don't know why it's an issue. So,
Yeah. It's a great question. Michael, do you know why it's an issue? I mean, you're someone who's impacted by that, but I mean, what? And I know these are not the same, trans and drag, but they're kind of lumped together a little bit in that circle of fear and legislation.
Well, so I can tell you that, this year, there are 453 anti-LGBTQ bills being run in state legislatures across the country. And I work in LGBT politics, so the vast majority of those bills are anti-trans bills, right? So we've got bills that ban gender-affirming care for youth in some states, even ones that want to ban gender-affirming medical care for adults, bans on trans young people participating in sports, forced outing bills where teachers or administrators in schools would be forced to out children to their parents if they come out to someone at that school, drag bans, trans bathroom bans. There are 21 bills that actually want to write transgender people completely out of law, so take any legal recognition of us as human beings out of law. So there's a whole lot of things happening here. And something that I think is really important to note, and Tim, I really like you saying, I really appreciate you saying for a large percentage of Americans, trans people didn't really exist until just a few years ago. And what we know is that today, when Americans are polled, about 20% of Americans will say that they know a trans person, right? And that's really the difference is that where 20% of Americans in 2022, 2023 will say, I know a trans person, about 90% of Americans will say they know a gay, lesbian, or bisexual person. And so what we know from the movement and from history is that when people know us, it's really hard to support this kind of stuff. Because when you know a trans person, when you know a gay person, you no longer think of us in stereotypes.
Right.
And so part of why I was really excited to be on your podcast is because I want people to know me. I want people to know me that I'm Michael. I'm a real boring guy. I have dogs and I'm remodeling my house right now. And
we saw one in the background.
I go to work and I take care of my mom. I'm just like an average dude that's doing his thing and leads a pretty quiet and boring life like most people. And I want to have a nice life. I want to help my family. We have lots of things in common. And so the thing that's different is that my biological sex did not align with my gender identity and therefore my gender, and that's it. And I went through some medical processes and social processes to change that, right? And so, but lots of people will say that they have some fear or anxiety, perhaps, in today's society around using the restroom with a trans person. I can guarantee you've probably used a restroom with a trans person and not known it. I use the restroom all the time with guys that don't think twice as we're using the restroom, and we just do our business and get out of there, right? And so for me, I think a lot of this is that not enough Americans know trans people, and especially not enough conservative Americans. And so I actually work with conservatives a lot. I work with a lot of conservative faith groups. I work with Republicans a lot, and I just sit down and start with, what do we have in common? Because I know there's something we've got in common. Yeah. Let's find it and start building, right? And let's talk to each other like people. Because when we see each other and value each other mutually as people, then all of this culture war stuff goes away. I mean, we've all lived through the culture wars before, right? In the 80s, the 90s. Trans people and critical race theory, like Tim said, right? These are the new culture war issues. Yeah. Politicians do this, political parties do this because they benefit from it, right? They raise money off of it, right? They win elections because of it. But ultimately, that's a short-term game to what Tim said as well. Like it's a long-term losing strategy. We see that gay marriage was that, right? We've got the LDS Church coming out last year affirming civil marriage for LGBTQ people and supporting the Respect for Marriage Act.
Oh, I didn't even hear that.
Yeah,
and that's
wow. That's huge for them.
The LDS Church and the Catholic Church, they were the ones sort of sponsoring and working on and advocating for a Proposition 8 in California, which was a ban on same-sex marriage, right? And so that was like, what, 2015? I mean, 2014, something like that. It was not that long ago. And so, it's all about knowing us, right? When you know us, it's really hard to hate people up close. When you know people, when you care about them, we tend to not buy into this culture war stuff. And so for me, I think that's the root of it. More Americans need to know the trans people in their families and in their communities so that we just become boring people. Just like, we're just living our lives, doing our thing. Nothing's scary about us.
Yeah, that's totally true. And, I think, I don't want to say there's I look at, when it comes to conservatism versus Republicans, it's become two separate things right now. Yes, but I do see a lot of, this legislation is very ignorant because there's already been case law established. Even though that gender identity is not part of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, it's still also part of it's been successfully litigated through the Macy versus Holder ATF decision under gender gender within Title VII, and then also they expanded Executive Order 11246 for federal contractors to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So, I mean, it's really going to be an uphill battle for some of this legislation. It's going to go to the Supreme Court and it'll die a slow death. And people don't realize that. And that's why you have these people who just don't know anything that are just out here. They're being a mouthpiece and, they're just hurting their party. They're hurting their cause. I mean, that's their cause, but everybody else who's a little bit more noble when it comes to conservatism, they're pretty much silent. I don't know if anybody notices, but it's all the same people who just seem to be running their mouth right now. So
it is. Well, when we look at
and I'm no, go ahead, Michael.
Any political belief or political party, right? What we are really seeing a lot of in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party these days is that like 2% of people on the furthest sort of edge of those parties, right? Of the most right wing, the most left wing. And they've just got bullhorns, right? They're just screaming at the top of their lungs.
The squeakiest wheels.
Exactly. But most people in those parties, either party, are much more towards the center, right? And they're just like, hey, I actually believe that policy shouldn't be about fighting about, things like people's gender identity. It should be about tackling inflation, right? And the price of bacon and making sure that World War III doesn't start, right?
And eggs. Yeah.
Right.
That's what's bizarre. This fear-based reaction is bizarre because we have, massive inflation. Oil prices are going crazy in a small part related to the war on Ukraine. There's so many much more important and interesting things we could be talking about. Like, how do we get, more money into education? How do we support teachers, to so they can be better prepared and resourced to teach our children? There's so many more interesting things we could be talking about besides which bathroom do you use and are you allowed to read books to kids in a public library?
Right.
It baffles me. But Tim, you really said it at the beginning. People are stuck. Sadly, a small, loud percentage of people are stuck on an ideological bend. When
and I have to say, someone like Mitt Romney, who's not really concerned with a lot of this stuff. I mean, he pegs his top 3 issues is economically, China's economy is a threat to the global economy stage. and also our debt, the national debt. But he also says climate change is a threat to, and Republicans just drive against that. But they aren't completely aware that there is a big lake in Utah that's drying up, because of climate change. So that has to be an issue of his, So sadly, there's not as many Republicans, and I'm a fan of Mitt Romney. I'm not ashamed to say it. He's one, even going back to gay marriage as the governor of Massachusetts. The first time I ever heard of him was from a friend of mine who's liberal. And she says, who I like is this guy named Mitt Romney, who's the governor of Massachusetts. He's for gay marriage because the people of Massachusetts are for gay marriage. He's truly representing his people, and representing his constituents. And there's a lot less of that going on right now. And it's all just culture war BS, So that's, and knowing him throughout his career, the steps that he's made, I don't know him personally. But I mean, I think that he would have, been a great solution. I don't think as much as people would have loved Obama, I don't think we'd be on this path right now if he would have been elected president. Honestly, we wouldn't have had the clown out of the box, So,
yeah,
but
I mean, there's a very real backlash, right, to Obama's presidency. All of this is part of that. I very much respect Senator Romney. I think he is a wonderful example of a politician who has ethics and understands that he is elected to serve. I enjoy working with him on the federal level and his team. I think he's just a fantastic example, not just of a conservative and a Republican, but of a politician who is a servant leader. I think the same thing of Senator Sinema, right? I think Senator Sinema is someone who is always looking for the way to get ideology and partisanship out of politics, and she's looking for policy solutions. She's saying, what are the big problems? What do we need to tackle together? And how do we bring people of whatever party together, enough people to get it through and make it law, right? Let's come up with a good solution that won't be relitigated forever. Like, I think the Affordable Care Act is one of the worst examples of passing public policy in modern times, because the backlash to the Affordable Care Act, because it was so partisan, created the Tea Party, created the MAGA movement, right? Like, that's all backlash to the Affordable Care Act, 100%, and to partisan politics.
Yeah.
And so I think, Senator Romney, Senator Sinema, there's so much respect for them. Senator Tillis, right? There's so many folks, Senator Murkowski, Senator Collins. It's what I would love to see in politics is a lot more of that style of leadership that says, this isn't about the
That's what we need
behind my name. Yeah, this is about serving my constituency and Americans, and actually tackling the big problems of our time, like climate change, like the threat of the Chinese economy on the American economy, right? Like the
absolutely
of, Ukraine by Russia, right? We've got big issues. Those are hard issues, though, and so I think we see people with sort of smaller minds, right, and people of pettiness choosing to pick on their fellow Americans instead of tackle these big problems together.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely true.
Is that because it's low hanging, rotten fruit?
The politician or the topics?
Good question.
Yeah, the topics, and the politicians.
The politicians, low hanging fruit for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's lighten it up then, because I think I love that we were able to recognize, members of both parties staying focused on issues, politicians who recognize that they're there to serve their constituents, even if their constituents have different beliefs or priorities than them. Like, if you're elected by a group, you need to serve the majority of that group, not your favorite little slice of that group. And I think that's an amazing takeaway. But to lighten it up, I would love to switch gears and talk about fashion, because this is another side of being a man in our world that we have gotten lost in
I'm completely
it's maybe
lost.
not as critical as trying to regulate people's, but here's what I'm frustrated with. When did men's style become a t-shirt and cargo shorts and flip-flops every day?
1997.
Well, fuck you, 1997. Not that, I mean, everything, is in balance. If you're going out on, a weekend morning, and you got to run an errand or something, sure, pair of shorts and flip-flops. But when I go out with my partner, I dress up a little bit. I put on a jacket. Full disclosure, I did put on this jacket and a little piece of jewelry I got at Joshua Tree.
Got the Mr. T starter kit.
Just for this podcast. Yes. I could get there. And lastly, when we go traveling, like when we get on an airplane, I dress up. And I've been doing this for a few years because traveling is actually, it used to be a big deal. Yeah. And I want men to stop wearing cargo shorts and t-shirts. And for the love of God, camouflage is meant for hunting, not for fashion.
So I was in the military and I don't wear camouflage. I refuse to wear camouflage. But because it was, I wore it every day for forever. But I think probably COVID. I used to dress up for work because I work downtown. I have an office downtown. I don't go there as much. I think once a week. I would wear a shirt and tie. When I go to events, I wear a full suit. But those events are few and far between. Essentially, most of my events now are over Microsoft Teams or on WebEx, and I'll have a shirt and tie on and gym shorts. Mm-hmm. I do recognize at a certain point, it was interesting because when I was single, I used to at least wear designer jeans. I'd wear button down shirts, and I'd have nice shoes on and stuff. And I try to look good but you're single, so you're trying to throw a net out there. But, mm-hmm. I would say, well, parenthood has changed me, however,
parents yes, a lot of passes.
Yeah, but yes. I'll tell you this, I went down to Tucson with my wife they have this big gem show down in Tucson, and we stayed right next to off of University by the University of Arizona. And we walked down where they have all their bars and stuff like that. Women completely dressed up. Every woman's wearing a halter top and some either tight jeans or a skirt and nice shoes and stuff like that. Every single guy, I'm just going to call him a guy, not a man, they all had a pair of jeans, white shoes or off-white because they're dirty, and whatever t-shirt they pulled off their floor before they walked out the door. Every single one of them. There wasn't one guy dressed up at all, but for me, if I'm at least going to go somewhere where I'm doing something, I'll look presentable, dress up a little bit, wear some nice shoes and stuff like that. But outside of that, I mean, I do want to get on a plane. I do wear flip-flops just because the whole taking your shoes off thing, and I need to make it easy on myself.
Yeah, you got to buck that. No. I mean, if you're dragging your kids along, yes, but let's bring it back. Michael, what's to you? Because I know you see this. You go out to dinner, and the women, like you said, Tim, are kind of dressed up, and the guys are wearing the same T-shirt and often shorts as they were wearing on the weekend.
And I would say often cisgender heterosexual men you see in that dress code. I think gay men tend to dress up a little more on a regular basis, or a little more fashion conscious. I'm a big fan of. I really hated fashion before I transitioned. I was not interested at all, and I really love men's fashion. It's so fun. I love wearing a suit. Like I have I have a travel suit wardrobe for because I travel for work a lot. So I like to wear a suit on the plane. I like to look nice. So I've got travel suits for the plane, and then meeting suits and work suits for when I'm, at a meeting and not on a plane. And I love finding ways to just enjoy fashion. There's so many great cuts of jeans and I'm shorter. I'm a lot shorter. So I like to have my clothes tailored so they fit me really well and I feel really good in them. And I find that I dress up for myself, not for anybody else. I dress up for myself because it makes me feel confident as a man, right? It makes me feel like there's just something about wearing a really nice jacket and a nice shirt and nice shoes. Like, gentlemen, let's get rid of the white tennis shoes. Like, it does not take that much effort to buy a nice casual shoe that looks good but isn't a white tennis shoe. Like athletic shoes are for the gym. Let's just invest a little bit and buy something between a dress shoe and a tennis shoe. There's lots of options out there. But I really have fun with it, and I think that for me, it very much it's about how I present to the world, certainly about my gender, but also about my profession, about my confidence in myself, about my pride in myself, and I just love that. I think, and I'm on Joseph, Joseph, I'm also single and don't have children, so that may factor into this. I've got time and money for it, but
I'm wearing a shirt that says Top Dad.
Yes. That's awesome.
Yeah, you do get a pass, but it'll change. I mean, it'll change the culture of men if we start dressing up. It's that whole look good, feel good. If we started dressing up a little bit more, like you said, Michael, you'll feel better. When we go out to dinner and we're both dressed up a little bit. I mean, she's dresses really well. She's got great fashion. I mean, you walk in there feeling a little taller, a little smirk on your face. Like, I love that feeling. And it does not take, it maybe takes 3 more seconds, to throw on a sports coat or pick out a different pair of shoes than it does to not put on that coat or that button-up shirt.
Exactly. Something that I was thinking of
we could change the world.
We can. And, it's actually, I know that fashion and purchasing clothing can be intimidating. I subscribe to a service where they pick out clothing for me. So I give them my measurements. I give them the colors I like, styles I like. I took this whole quiz, that was all what are things that resonate with me. And then each month I get a box of clothing that is super cool, right? It's I get new jackets, I get new kinds of shoes to wear. It's great. And then you do that for a little while, and then you get a better sense of what you actually like in terms of fashion, and then I can go and buy that on my own now.
I see that. Yeah,
that's cool.
I love that kind of jacket, right? So I suggest that for men that are a little intimidated by fashion. There's a ton of these services. Subscribe to one. It's a little bit of money, but it's an investment in yourself. And do that for yourself.
Yeah. What's the service?
The one that I use is called Stately. I'm looking at the box right now. I just got one of the boxes. Right. Yeah, it's called Stately. Right. It's super cool. Yeah,
I've heard of that. Yeah,
Stately. Okay, maybe they can be a sponsor.
Hey, there you go.
I just wrote that in our sheet. Yeah, because that's the thing, guys, is you have a lot of choices. I mean, you could go to, if you've got the means, you can go to, a department store that does fittings and stuff. I actually have, I think this jacket is, I got it. It's from Nordstrom, but it's off the rack. It's their I think it's stuff that doesn't sell or whatever.
They're Nordstrom.
Surplus.
They're Nordstrom Rack brand. They actually have specific brands just for Nordstrom Rack.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah. So you can go that saves you a few bucks. You got good consignment stores out here in Arizona. We've got Buffalo Exchange. And I still, my partner, we still hit up a Goodwill once in a while, like a Friday on a weekend or a yard sale and stuff. You have a massive tier of buying and monetary options to choose from to look good and feel good. So it doesn't have to cost you. And the services.
I used to be all about snobby. I would just like shop at Nordstrom's there, and it was really their annual sale or the semi-annual sale and stuff like that. I'd be snobby about, it's shopping at Walmart, and I'm like, nowadays I got kids and I've got like mouths to feed, and my daughter didn't eat her apples. I'm like, that's like, how much money is this? So I'm like, okay. I like this shirt. I think I want to get it, but not at this price. So, I'm about like, I'll shop at anywhere now. So it doesn't matter to me. I'll go anywhere. And as long as I can find something used, new, sale, clearance. That's my jam, and you can always put together stuff, but I would say the brick and mortar was really the death of the brick and mortar stores is probably also killing fashion, I would say. I mean, the fashion boxes, where you get the outfits, like you get like a combination of things, a pair of pants, a couple shirts, and whatever. I mean, it's really reinventing things, but at the same time, I would say, those department stores provided a service. They had a tailor, and they had someone to help you find the clothing that was right for you before they just started hiring any rando off the street to,
or you had the mannequins that were, pre-dressed.
Yeah,
that you could get ideas from.
Hey, my biggest tip, though.
So the question, though, Tim.
Well, let me give you a tip on the mannequins.
Go ahead.
I would always look at the size of the mannequins, because they would keep the clothing on the mannequins for an extended period of time. So the odds are good that some of those items were actually extremely on sale. So like ridiculously cut down, and I'd be like, "What size is this? My size?" So yeah, when I started transitioning into my cheapskate persona. So, yeah.
Cheapskate / parental persona. But that's the question for you, Tim. And so now you're a role model to two small humans. What kind of what kind of role model are you being for your two young humans? Do you want your son to see, a well-dressed dad, and again, you get a pass. All parents get a pass because it's the hardest job.
Yeah. You know what? When my son was a toddler, I bought him a couple of Depeche Mode shirts for toddlers, and we would have like matching Depeche Mode shirts. It was, it's his rite of passage, but, for my son, he has autism, of course. So he has like some sensory issues. So we put him in a lot of like, gym clothes kind of things, that stuff that's softer for him. Cause usually when he's at home, he would just rather not have a t-shirt and shorts on. And, he would just, he's more comfortable that way. But when it comes to some things that he wears, it's a little bit more on the sensory end of things, but we try to make sure he has something nice to wear. If it comes down to like going to do something nice or anything like that, my wife picks all those clothes out, and she, my daughter, actually, my daughter got some hand-me-downs from another kid that from friends of ours, that their kid was about, I want to say she's maybe about 4 years older than my daughter. And so my wife came home with like a ton of clothes one time, and like tags still on some of that stuff. And it was like nice dressers, all kinds of crazy stuff. And my daughter just as she was getting bigger, because it was over the years of clothes. So as she's getting bigger, she's like getting into all these clothes. So my daughter actually, bless her little cotton socks, man. She like can't match to save her life, but she does like to put on a dress. So yeah, she'll.
Well, I think Nancy does, right? Doesn't Nancy have a fashion?
She's a fashionista. Yeah. So she definitely, she knows her way around. I'm usually like, at this point in my life, I used to be very careful about matching. And now it's like, she just like looks at me and she's like, you're going to wear that? Doesn't even match. I'm like,
glad you have someone to keep you in check.
So
we've talked about we've agreed on a few things. So no camouflage. Michael, do you have any camouflage? Because I know it's like it can show up in like trendy clothes.
And
No?
I'm not really a trendy clothes wearer. I'm more like I like suits. I like dress clothes. So not much for the trendy clothes. I tend to be rather. I don't know. I like the fact I have a lot of men's hats. Like I'm into like the old school, like wear a nice suit, wear really nice, shoes and a nice hat, and go out in the world. I've got lots of. I live in Arizona, which is silly, but I have lots of coats because when I travel back east, I can wear a nice, coat for with my suit and kind of do the whole thing. So
like going to the ballpark in 1953.
Exactly. I feel like
that's right.
Like
that was really, classic.
That's where my fashion sense is like 1940s, 1950s. Men.
Yes.
Nice. The golden age.
That's basically yes.
Yeah. I love it.
Absolutely. So how do we feel about, on that note, how do we feel about skinny ties? Because that's from that era. I have a few that my grandfather owned. I have a few that I've bought on my own. And when I go out, when I'm wearing them, people either love them or hate them. People either think they're like kind of, I don't know, like snobby or elite, or
are you talking like
they love them?
80s,
really kind of get
80s skinny ties, like the little tiny ones?
No.
Or are you just like maybe about?
No. Like the 50s.
Oh,
like the 50s
I have one.
Ties,
My wife got it for me. Yeah. I wore it. It was a designer tie. I got compliments on it. I'm mainly because my wife picked it out, but I would say no to the bolo.
Michael, skinny ties.
Yeah, no to the bolo.
No to the. Whoa.
No bolo. Awful. It's the worst. Yeah.
No, it's the official necktie wear of Arizona.
Okay, really quick story. There's this book. It was a little book that Esquire magazine put out in the 90s, co-written by Ted Allen of Chopped and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Because he was a writer for Esquire, and I used to subscribe, and they had an excerpt from it. So I went out and bought this book, Everything a Man Needs to Know About Style But Was Afraid to Ask. And one of his comments in there was, never own a bolo tie. You could die and someone will find it.
That's so good.
Well, first, the proper pronunciation is bola tie. We tend to say bolo because it has that masculine ending in so many languages, but it's actually bola tie. And I have one that was handmade for me by a lapidarian jewelry maker in the shape of Arizona, with like the Arizona flag built in with different stones. And I'm going to firmly
in that case
with the majority here and say
I'm opposed to the bolo tie. I do like the skinny tie.
So there's no, like, what if you got like a suit on, and a shirt, and you dressed it up a little bit? I mean, I'm not wearing just a bola and cargo shorts, like camouflage cargo shorts. It's a whole ensemble.
I tried to do a bolo tie on a denim jacket one time, just in the pocket, like I was Ducky from Pretty in Pink or something. So I wasn't rocking it out.
It feels like jewelry, not like a tie.
Okay, why not?
It's jewelry for me, not a tie.
Okay.
So,
but isn't jewelry okay? Like I'm wearing jewelry now. This is a piece of bronze, locally made art from Joshua Tree.
I think actually mentioned.
So why not? Why not a bolo tie then?
I don't think it's a tie. It's not a tie. It's jewelry. It's not a tie. So this doesn't work for me.
Well, okay. So if you're thinking of it as jewelry, is it okay then?
I mean, I still wouldn't wear it because I'm not a fan of it, but I like other types of jewelry. But
it's acceptable if you just call it jewelry.
There you go.
This is what he said. There you go.
Jewelry. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the common ground.
I'm man enough to call it jewelry. Yeah, and that's a good sort of like cap for all this is like as a man you get to own your stuff, own whatever you're gonna wear, whether it's jewelry, that's part of authentic masculinity is standing up for yourself, and others,
There you go.
and that may be part of another
There you
podcast. Michael, any closing thoughts for us before we sign off?
I think my favorite thing about being a man and manhood, and this ties into fashion, is that, like you said, Joseph, we get to choose, right? We get to own our choices around how we define our maleness and our manhood. That can be fashion, that can be how we show up in community life, how we show up for a family, right? It can mean lots of things. It probably means a combination of lots of different things in your life, how you show up at work. But I want men to feel empowered in those choices, right? Just like I want women to, right? Just like I want non-binary people to. Like, we get to define our lives. That's a really beautiful and wonderful thing. And whatever you love about being a man, be that, right? Like, love being a man is a wonderful thing. I want men to be proud of being men, to contribute to society as men. That's a great thing. I love that about being a man. And I just hope more men can find that positive masculinity and manhood that we need in this country and in this society. Because I think that makes us stronger as a nation, as a people, as a species.
Well said.
I agree. Well said. So, Michael, we close on a little bit of trivia each time. So our first episode, the inaugural episode, we asked, where was Steven Spielberg's first public showing in Arizona? And the answer, all the people probably looked
was ever.
Because, Google and Bing and Ask Jeeves.
It was ever. His first film ever.
Ever? First film ever was actually shown at what was at the time called the Phoenix Little Theater, now called the Phoenix Theater Company. So Steven Spielberg got to start here. If you go to the Phoenix Theater Company, you can actually see a big poster of Steven Spielberg with like a little thank you note in there that they got from him as a recognition of this space.
Very nice.
And so that's trivia if you didn't Google it. Next week's trivia. Yeah. So next week's trivia. So don't answer this if you know it, Michael. I'm not assuming you will, but for our audience at this point, maybe our tens of listeners or our one listener, my partner, who was the trans femme fatale in an old James Bond movie?
Dun, dun, dun.
So one of the classics had, one of the, they all have a femme fatale character, or a few of them. And one of them was trans in one of the movies. I believe it was early 80s.
Roger Moore.
Don't quote me on that just yet.
Well, no, I'm like the Roger Moore era.
It's the trans woman.
Era.
Yeah.
So.
Like the trans woman was not Roger
right.
Moore. So there's your question. But Michael.
Playing the character.
Yeah. No, a trans woman. Trans woman playing.
I think I know who it is.
Female character, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know who it is. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah. But if I can second what you said, Michael, before I hand it over to Tim, I love being a man, be an authentic man, lean into it, be a good person. And that's what this podcast is all about. The Manscape.
All right. Yeah. Well, that is our view of the Manscape. And we'd like to thank our guest, Michael Soto. Tune in next week while we talk rum and men in bars with Dwayne Allen.